For almost 30 years after World War II ended, the public had no idea that many of the war's most decisive battles in the Atlantic were directed from an anonymous country house north of London, where British and Allied codebreakers secretly read the radio messages of German U-boat commanders in near real time. The operation that produced this intelligence carried the innocuous codename Ultra, yet it gave Allied admirals a hidden map of the North Atlantic revealing the changing positions of wolf packs that were strangling the shipping lifeline between North America and Britain. The crews sailing through gales, torpedoes, and burning oil never knew that unseen analysts were tracking their enemies from rows of cipher machines and handwritten decrypts. Until Ultra was finally declassified in the 1970s. Official histories explain the sudden collapse of the U-boat threat in 1943 as luck, better tactics, or new radar, while the real story remained locked in classified files. The episode that reveals how Ultra quietly reshaped the Battle of the Atlantic unfolded in late April and early May 1943. When convoy ONS 5A slow westbound formation of merchant ships left Liverpool bound for Halifax under almost constant threat of U-boat attack. At 18 o'clock hours on the 21st of April 1943. The first ships of ONS 5 slipped out of the Mersey estuary, part of a columned convoy that would eventually total 40. Two merchant vessels escorted by a mixed group of Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Navy destroyers, corvettes, and a lone frigate. Their route would take them through the cold central North Atlantic, across a vast stretch of ocean where, despite growing Allied air power, large gaps still existed in air coverage. This was the killing ground that Admiral Carl Dunnett's S-U-boat arm sought to dominate with roaming wolf packs, concentrating submarines by night on convoys detected by long-range patrol aircraft, direction-finding stations, or chance sightings. The stakes for both sides were straightforward and enormous. For the Allies, keeping food, fuel, and munitions flowing from North America to Britain meant survival. For Germany, severing that link offered the only realistic path to forcing Britain out of the war. By the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a crisis point. In March alone, German U-boats sank over 500,000 tons of Allied shipping, and the Kriegsmarine High Command believed it was on the verge of winning what Dönitz called the tonnage war. Allied naval staffs in London, Ottawa, and Washington tracked losses on situation maps covered in colored pins that crept ominously across the ocean routes. On paper, the balance looked bleak. Britain's stockpiles of grain and fuel were finite. American shipyards could not instantly replace every tanker and freighter that slipped beneath the waves. And the escort fleets were stretched thin between the North Atlantic, the Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union, and operations in the Mediterranean. At sea, the conditions favored the hunter. North Atlantic weather in late April was characterized by low clouds, freezing spray, and frequent storms that battered ships and reduced visibility. Surface escorts struggled to maintain station in heavy seas, while submerged U-boats could hide beneath wave action and attack unexpectedly at night or in fog. Radio communications between ships were kept to a minimum to avoid giving away convoy positions, leaving captains often isolated in darkness, relying on signal lamps and disciplined station keeping. Unknown to the vast majority of sailors on both sides, a parallel struggle was unfolding far from the spray and cold of the North Atlantic. Inside the brick buildings and wooden huts of Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire, about 50 miles northwest of London. There, since 1939, mathematicians, linguists, and naval intelligence officers had worked to break the various versions of the German Navy's Enigma cipher. whose electrical rotors and plugboard wiring produced an astronomical number of possible settings. By 1941, thanks to a combination of pre-war Polish insights, captured codebooks, and relentless analytical work, the British code-breaking organization known as the Government Code and Cipher School could routinely decrypt many Luftwaffe and Army messages. Naval Enigma, however, remained more resistant, particularly the key used by U-boats operating in the Atlantic, which the British designated Shark. Each time the Kriegsmarine introduced new rotor wheels, altered keying procedures, or changed their radio discipline, the flow of readable messages could dry up for weeks or months. When that happened, Admiralty tracking rooms lost their most valuable source of insight into U-boat dispositions. And convoys like ONS-5 had to sail without the hidden advantage Ultra could provide. The intelligence derived from these decrypts was treated with the highest possible security classification. By 1941, it had been given the codename Ultra, signifying that it was considered more sensitive, the material marked most secret. Only a tightly controlled circle of senior commanders in Britain, the United States, and later Canada were informed of its existence. Operational orders issued on the basis of Ultra were carefully disguised to appear as though they derived from radio direction finding, reconnaissance flights, or routine patrol sightings. At Western approaches, Command in Liverpool, where the Royal Navy coordinated the defense of North Atlantic convoys, a small group of officers handled Ultra messages in a separate room, drafting suggestions for route changes or reinforcement requests without revealing that the source was penetrated German radio traffic. After the war, official histories of the Battle of the Atlantic either omitted Ultra entirely or referred to it obliquely as special intelligence, and the detailed intercepts, decrypts, and distribution lists remained locked in government archives, unavailable to researchers until the 1970s. When convoy ONS-5 assembled in the Mersey approaches in April 1943, Ultra was emerging from one of its most dangerous blackouts. In early 1942, the Germans had added a fourth rotor to Naval Enigma machines used by Atlantic U-boats, which temporarily blinded the codebreakers and allowed wolf packs to inflict severe losses. Intensive work at Bletchley Park, supported by captures of key tables and machine components from seized U-boats, such as U-559 in October 1942, gradually restored the ability to read shark traffic. By late April 1943, Hut 8, the section responsible for Naval Enigma, was again producing daily decrypts of U-boat situation reports, patrol area assignments, and contact messages. These decrypts, however, did not arrive as a continuous stream of perfect information. Many were delayed by hours, sometimes days, because of the time required to determine the machine settings and reconstruct the original German messages. Others were incomplete or fragmentary, forcing analysts at the Operational Intelligence Center in London to build up an evolving picture of U-boat deployments from partial clues. For ONS-5, this meant that as the convoy plowed westward into worsening weather, there existed in London a shadow map of the ocean, marked with estimated positions of multiple wolf packs converging toward the main North Atlantic routes. The naval escort assigned to ONS-5 was Escort Group B-7 under the command of Captain Peter Gretton of the Royal Navy, flying his broad pennant in the destroyer HMS Duncan. Alongside Duncan sailed the destroyers HMS Vedette and HMS Volunteer, the Royal Navy corvettes, HMS Tay, HMS Snowflake, and HMS Sunflower, and the Royal Canadian Navy corvettes HMCs Loosestrife and HMCs Aurelia, supported later in the passage by additional destroyers detached from other duties. Their mission was to shepherd the slow-moving merchantmen, many laden with ballast rather than cargo, on the westbound leg through an ocean, where radio intercepts indicated that at least 3 U-boat groups bearing names like Specht and Fink were maneuvering to cut across expected convoy tracks. On board each escort, as the convoy cleared the Irish Sea and entered the open Atlantic in late April. Radar operators, ASDIC sonar crews, and lookouts maintained exhausting watches, scanning for the faintest sign of periscope wakes or surfaced submarines. The ship's captains knew only that Admiralty routing orders had sent them on a track south of the most common routes, a pattern often used when secret intelligence suggested heavy U-boat concentrations farther north. In London, however, officers cleared to sea ultra-submarines watched the situation harden against ONS 5 as new decrypts arrived. By the 30th of April, decoded signals showed Dunet's ordering additional U-boats to patrol lines west of Ireland, tightening a barrier that the convoy would have to cross around the first days of May, the intersection of that invisible barrier and the plotted convoy track defined the coming battleground at sea. On the 30th of April 1943, as ONS 5 rolled westward in worsening seas roughly midway between Ireland and Newfoundland, the walls of rain and low cloud that battered the convoy also complicated the efforts of both sides to locate each other. The convoy still maintained a strict zigzag pattern designed to complicate the firing solutions of any U-boat stalking them, with course changes ordered on a predefined schedule passed to the merchant captains before departure. From Western approaches, Command Admiralty officers, informed by ultra-decrypts, ordered a subtle alteration of the convoy track to slip it between 2 newly identified patrol lines that had been created by the German U-boat command, based on their own intelligence assessments. At the same time, the German side was not operating blindly. The Kriegsmarine's B. Dean's codebreaking service had been successfully reading portions of British Naval Cipher No. 3, allowing Donitz's staff to reconstruct approximate convoy routes. Thus, in the days leading up to the main battle, ONS 5 became an unwitting focal point of a largely invisible contest between opposing cryptologic organizations and radio intelligence staffs. B. Dean's analysts in occupied France and Germany sifted through intercepted Allied convoy signals using partial solutions to British codes and standardized routing patterns to designate patrol lines with codenames such as Specht, Amsel, and Fink, each composed of several U-boats spread out across hundreds of miles. At Bletchley Park and the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, British officers overlaid decrypted Enigma traffic on plotting charts to infer how those same wolf packs were being redeployed. On board several escorts, including HMS Duncan and HMS Vedette, newly installed high-frequency direction finding sets, known as HFDF or Huff Duff, gave local commanders a means of detecting the bearings of U-boats whenever they transmitted brief radio reports. The result was a complex feedback loop in which every signal risked revealing something to the enemy. Contact between ONS 5 and the waiting U-boats began not with a torpedo trail, but with fleeting electronic traces. On the 29th of April, Allied HFDF stations ashore and at sea picked up multiple short German transmissions in the latitude band ahead of the convoy, consistent with U-boats reporting positions to the North Atlantic U-boat Command at Cornwall near Loreang. Admiralty staff, correlating these bearings with recent ultra-decrypts of patrol orders, concluded that several boats from Group Specht were forming a line roughly across ONS 5's projected path. A series of routing signals redirected the convoy slightly to the southwest, a change that could be justified to ships' captains as a standard response to weather forecasts. Out at sea, HMS Duncan used its own HFDF set to home on one of the transmissions, dispatching HMS Vedette to investigate. In heavy seas and poor visibility, Vedette's radar briefly detected a surfaced contact before it dived, leaving only disturbed water. From the German perspective, the picture was similarly incomplete, but sufficiently suggestive to justify concentrating additional forces. Radio messages sent in naval enigma by individual U-boats on the 30th of April and the 1st of May, later decrypted at Bletchley Park, show commanders reporting poor visibility, heavy seas, and difficulty in maintaining their assigned positions along the patrol lines. Nevertheless, the staff of the Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, using B-densed estimates of convoy movements, believed that at least one large westbound convoy was entering the central Atlantic Gap. Dönitz ordered several groups, including Amsel and Fink, to shift their lines so that they overlapped in depth. An example of the flexible Wolfpack tactics that had proven so costly to Allied shipping in 1942. U-boats were instructed to maintain radio silence unless in contact with a convoy, then to shadow on the surface and send positional reports so that others could gather for coordinated night attacks from multiple directions. By the night of the 3rd of May, the developing situation broke into open combat. As Ons 5 pressed on into the western Atlantic under gale force winds, at roughly 52 degrees north and 38 degrees west, several U-boats managed to work into contact despite the poor conditions. The heavy seas, which made accurate ASTIC detection difficult for the escorts, also forced many submarines to remain on the surface to avoid being driven too deep or losing speed. German doctrine at this stage emphasized surface night attacks, using the low silhouette of a U-boat against the dark horizon to approach within torpedo range before submerging briefly to fire. However, the introduction of centimetric radar sets such as Type 271 on some escorts gave Allied commanders a counter. HMS Duncan and HMS Vedette used radar to detect suspicious small echoes on the flanks of the convoy, driving them off with starshell illumination and rapid-fire gun bursts, even when visual contact was marginal or intermittent. During the crucial night of the 4th to the 5th of May, the engagement intensified into one of the largest convoy battles of the war. Approximately 30 U-boats from several groups had been directed, on the strength of Bedienst assessments and sighting reports, toward what Dönitz's staff now believed was a major target. Ultra-intercepts of these movement orders, decoded with several hours' delay, but still operationally useful, alerted British authorities to the scale of the concentration being assembled against Ons 5. Western Approaches Command arranged for additional destroyers, including HMS Aefe and HMS Oribe, to reinforce Escort Group B7 as they became available from refueling and other duties. At sea, U-boats attempted to break into the convoy screen repeatedly, sometimes firing spreads of torpedoes from outside the main escort ring, at other times penetrating between columns of merchant ships under cover of darkness and heavy precipitation. Escorts responded with aggressive depth charge attacks, often dropping patterns on fleeting radar contacts or ASTIC traces. Captain Gretton's tactical decisions during these hours reflected an evolving Allied doctrine that emphasized offensive escort action rather than purely defensive screening. Instead of keeping all warships rigidly tied to close convoy escort, he detached individual ships or small groups to prosecute promising contacts at a distance, trusting the remaining escorts and the convoys disciplined, zigzagging to maintain reasonable protection. Several of B-7's corvettes were equipped with the ahead-throwing Hedgehog mortar, which projected a pattern of contact-fused bombs in front of the ship rather than dropping charges solely behind the stern. This allowed escorts to attack without losing ASTIC contact in their own wake. When radar or HFDF suggested a nearby surfaced U-boat, Gretton ordered rapid turns and high-speed chases even through breaking seas, accepting the short-term exposure of sections of the convoy screen as the price for disrupting enemy firing positions. merchant captains, following prearranged emergency turn signals, maneuvered their heavily laden or ballasted ships as best they could. German after-action reports and war diary entries reveal growing frustration as the battle developed. Several U-boat commanders noted that surprise surface approaches were repeatedly spoiled by what they believed to be improved Allied radar, whose emissions were sometimes detected imperfectly by the METOX warning receivers fitted to many boats. In heavy seas, the characteristic buzz of METOX was often masked by background noise, leaving crews uncertain whether they were being tracked. Depth charge attacks during the nights of the 4th and the 5th of May inflicted cumulative damage on a number of submarines, forcing some to break off the action and head for bases in occupied France or Norway with leaking hulls and damaged batteries. At the U-boat command, signals traffic intercepted and later read by Ultra showed Dunet's S-staff struggling to reconcile optimistic B-Dienst predictions with increasingly negative situation reports from the North Atlantic. The expectation of a one-sided tonnage victory was giving way to recognition of stiffening Allied resistance. By daylight on the 5th of May, the sea around Ons 5 bore signs of the night's exchanges, with oil patches, floating debris, and stragglers struggling to regain station. Several merchant ships had been hit by torpedoes during the darkness, forcing their crews to abandon them in lifeboats or on rafts, while the escorts claimed at least one probable U-boat destroyed based on underwater explosions and rising air bubbles. Archival records identify one confirmed success when an escort used radar to fix a surfaced submarine closed rapidly and attacked with depth charges and Hedgehog in succession, after which no further transmissions or sightings from that U-boat were recorded. Air support from long-range aircraft of RAF Coastal Command, including Liberator bombers operating from bases in Northern Ireland and Iceland, also entered the battle area intermittently, driving down submarines caught on the surface, recharging batteries, or attempting to reposition around the convoy. In the dark depths of World War II, a battle raged that would decide the fate of nations. It wasn't fought on sun-drenched beaches or in ruined cities, but on the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. This was the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest continuous military campaign of the war. And at its heart was a convoy that would become legendary, Ons 5. Imagine this. It's late April 1943. The war is at a tipping point. Britain is on its knees, utterly dependent on a lifeline of ships bringing food, fuel, and weapons from North America. But lurking beneath the waves is the U-boat, the German submarine, hunting in packs. These wolf packs are the terror of the seas, sinking Allied ships faster than they can be built. This period is known to the U-boat crews as the happy time, but for the merchant sailors, it's a living nightmare. Into this deadly arena sails convoy Ons 5. The O stands for outward, N for North Atlantic, and S for slow. And slow it was. 43 merchant ships carrying everything from timber to ammunition were crawling across the ocean at a snail's pace, averaging just 6 knots. Protecting them was a small but determined group of escorts, 2 destroyers, a frigate, and 4 corvettes. It was a David versus Goliath scenario. The commander of the escort group, Peter Gretton, knew the odds were stacked against him. The weather was atrocious. A full-blown Arctic gale swept down from Greenland, scattering the convoy and making it nearly impossible for the small escort ships to keep station. Visibility was 0, and the waves were monstrous. It was the perfect storm, and it was the perfect hunting ground for the U-boats. On April 28th, the hunt began. The German U-boat command, led by Admiral Karl Dunetz, had a new strategy. He was concentrating his wolf packs, bringing together dozens of submarines to overwhelm the convoy's defenses in a coordinated, crushing attack. Two massive wolf packs, named Star and Fink, with over 40 U-boats between them, were ordered to converge on Ons 5. It was the largest concentration of U-boats ever assembled to attack a single convoy. The first few days were a desperate struggle against the elements. The storm was so bad that even the U-boats had trouble. But as the weather began to clear slightly, the attack began in earnest. The airwaves crackled with U-boat signals as they homed in on their prey. The escort crews were exhausted. Their sonar, or ASTIC as the British called it, was their only eyes beneath the waves. The constant ping, ping, ping of the sonar became the soundtrack to their fight for survival. The night of May 4th was hell on earth. U-boats struck from all directions. A torpedo hit the American freighter McKeesport, which erupted in a ball of fire, its cargo of explosives detonating with a terrifying roar. One after another, ships were hit. The sky was lit up by the flames of burning vessels, their death cries echoing across the dark water. The escorts raced back and forth, dropping depth charges, trying to break up the attacks and desperately attempting to rescue survivors from the freezing ocean. Commander Gretton's flagship, the destroyer HMS Duncan, had to leave the convoy to refuel, a critical blow at the worst possible moment. Command fell to Lieutenant Commander Robert Sherwood of the frigate HMS Tay. Despite the chaos, Sherwood and his small force fought back with incredible courage. The corvette HMS Pink identified a U-boat and rammed it, a move of sheer desperation. Another escort, HMS Orabee, also rammed a submarine. They were fighting with everything they had, but the losses were mounting. By the morning of May 5th, 12 merchant ships had been sunk. The convoy was in tatters. It seemed like a catastrophic defeat. From his headquarters in Germany, Admiral Dönitz believed he was on the verge of a decisive victory, one that could sever the Allied lifeline and starve Britain into submission. But something was happening that Dönitz didn't understand. His U-boats were also taking a beating. While the merchant ships were sinking, the escorts were fighting back with a new ferocity and effectiveness. They weren't just defending. They were hunting. The Royal Canadian Air Force and the RAF's Coastal Command provided crucial air support. Their long-range bombers now able to patrol the mid-Atlantic gap that had once been a safe haven for U-boats. And there was another secret weapon at play: ultra-intelligence. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German naval Enigma codes. They were reading Dönitz's secret messages to his U-boat commanders almost in real time. This gave the Allies an unprecedented advantage. They knew where the wolf packs were gathering and could reroute convoys to avoid them or reinforce the escorts to fight them. For Ons 5, this intelligence was vital. Even though the convoy couldn't be fully diverted, the Admiralty in London knew the scale of the threat. They rushed reinforcements, including the First Support Group, a fast, dedicated U-boat hunting team. This group arrived like the cavalry in the final phase of the battle. On May 6th, the tide turned dramatically. The reinforced escorts, now guided by precise intelligence and air cover, went on the offensive. Using new tactics and improved radar and sonar technology, they began to systematically hunt down the U-boats. The hunters became the hunted. Over the course of the day, 6 U-boats were confirmed sunk, and several more were damaged and forced to retreat. The German U-boat crews, once so confident, were now in a state of shock. Their radios filled with panicked reports of surprise attacks from the air and relentless pursuit by the escorts. The devastating effectiveness of the Allied counterattack was something they had never experienced before. Seeing the catastrophic losses his submarines were suffering, Admiral Dönitz made a difficult decision. He called off the attack. The surviving U-boats of Wolfpack Star and Fink were ordered to withdraw. The battle for Ons 5 was over. The final tally was stark. The Allies had lost 13 merchant ships, a heavy price. But the Germans had lost 6 U-boats, sunk, and 7 more damaged, with hundreds of experienced crewmen lost. More importantly, Dönitz had thrown his best against a single convoy and had been decisively beaten. The psychological blow was immense. The U-boat arm, which had come so close to winning the Battle of the Atlantic, had been checked. The Battle of Ons 5 marked a crucial turning point. The month of May 1943 became known as Black May in the German submarine force. In that month alone, they lost over 40 U-boats. The loss rate became unsustainable. Dönitz was forced to temporarily withdraw his U-boats from the North Atlantic. The happy time was over for good. The victory at Ons 5 was not down to one single factor. It was a combination of things: the raw courage and tenacity of the merchant sailors and their escort crews, the increasing effectiveness of air power closing the mid-Atlantic gap, new technologies like high-frequency direction finding, or HFDUF, and improved radar, and, crucially, the unseen hand of the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. The battle demonstrated that the Allies had finally developed a winning formula for anti-submarine warfare. They could now protect their convoys and actively destroy the U-boat threat. The lifeline to Britain was secured. This meant that the massive buildup of American troops and equipment in the UK could continue, paving the way for the DI landings in Normandy a year later. Without the victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, epitomized by the fight for Ons 5, the liberation of Europe might never have happened. So, the next time you think about the major battles of World War II, remember the sailors of Ons 5. Remember their struggle in the freezing, storm-tossed Atlantic, fighting a desperate battle against a hidden enemy. Their victory was not just about saving a few dozen ships. It was about saving the entire Allied war effort. It was the moment the tide turned deep in the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic. Thanks for watching. If you found this story of courage and strategy as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. See you in the next video.